I came to Washington in 1979 to work for the corporation to take charge of commercial market research and marketing in order to attract investment to Washington Newtown. Since finishing, I am also the chair of Washington History Society. The Newtown programme as a whole had been set up by the post-war Labour government in the 1940s, and Durham exceptionally had two at Aycliffe and Peterlee. The region really didn't have a great time in the 1940s and 50s. Washington itself had working pits that were coming to the end of their life. However, its great fortune is its location, more or less equidistant between Newcastle, Sunderland and Durham, and the County Council had already identified it as the area for growth and was going to compulsory purchase 700 acres for expansion. The second big events that was occurring was the line of the A1M and the A19 were agreed and were going to be built, and where they meet clearly would generate interest. In the light of that, development was already happening in Washington with housing developments in the village and what is now Sulgrave, and investment by a company called Tube Investments who bought up quite a few acres. The outfit that was resisting Newtown was Sunderland Borough Council. So it was an easy decision for the government to say no. But the Hailsham report of 1963, which was investigating why the North East continually underperformed economically, recommended the beefing up of the new towns at Aycliffe and Peterlee and the creation of a third one at Washington on an area that had already been identified. The area that is now Washington was somewhat exhausted. It had numerous shafts and pits over the centuries, and 4 working pits the NCB were already identifying as having a relatively short life. It had 2,300 substandard housing and 2 of the notorious Category D villages. These had been defined by County Durham in the 1950s as ones that weren't worthy of any investment. And in this part of the world, that was Fatfield and Patterson Town. So it was badly scarred with something like 5 million tonnes of coal waste. Well, I think that the biggest thing that happened then was the speed of change, because Hailsham reported in November 1963. They decided in March 1964. They have a bit of an inquiry in May and June, and it's designated in July 1964. They appoint the board and the general manager, Steve Holly, and in February they appoint Britain's leading urban designers, Llewellyn Davis, to produce a master plan. They in turn did an interim plan by September 1965, and you then started seeing roads, housing and factories coming out of the ground, although the plan itself wasn't formally approved until August 1967. And here it is. It's very prescriptive. It's very much aware of growing car usage and vehicle movements. So it dominates with the road planning and everything that would flow from that. The corporation had learnt from the mistakes of Aycliffe and Peterlee. So all the board members were local, not from other parts of the country. It had total control over commercial developments, not the Board of Trade. And it produced this master plan very early, which didn't happen in those 2 new towns who suffered in the 1940s and 50s from various shortages and so on. So in essence, Washington got off to a flying start, and within a few years the locals are seeing housing and highways sprouting out of the ground. Among its targets was a town that eventually could accommodate 80,000 people. And the starting point was building up sizes of community groups from a base that no primary school child would cross a main road. And a 2-form entry would be about 80 children, and 3 forms maybe up to 140 or so on. And it would be a community of 4,500 would generate that entry. If you got a final target of 80,000, divide that by 4,500, you get 18. 18 residential villages were planned for Washington. And rather than having single big industrial estates, the idea was to spread them around the periphery of the town and make them accessible by foot, bicycle, public transport or car or whatever. And 11 sites were identified. So with the residential villages towards the centre and the employment areas on the peripheries. Huge amount of attention was paid to shopping requirements, and it would be a hierarchy: a single large shopping centre, 3 district centres, however only one survived. What was New Washington became Concord. There should have been 2 more, and then shopping parades in each village for everyday needs. They always recognised as well that half of the residents of Washington would work outside the town, and half the jobs in Washington would come from in-commuters. So it was always going to be an integral part of the area. In fact, it is Britain's only urban new town, because the population that was to move to Washington was to come from little more than a bus ride away. They would still be local to the area and have access to city centre and town centre facilities like major shopping and cinemas and theatres and the football grounds, of course. Another significant design requirement was the separation of vehicles from pedestrians. So there would be a hierarchy of roads, the major highways, the secondary highways to take you to the district level, and then the access roads to get into individual streets and so on. But then a separate networks of paths, that complete sense of safety, not having people cheek by jowl with moving traffic. Quite a lot of local people were quite horrified what they were seeing, which in essence was a huge construction site, and the loss of some favourite facilities or favourite routes. And one of the most controversial was the cutting of Spout Lane between Washington Village and New Washington, now Concord, and also Village Lane, which went out west from Washington Village, ultimately to Berkeley. Udsworth Welfare Hall. It was in the way of the route of one of the major highways, so it was demolished. And staggeringly, the route was changed. It could have survived. The people down in Fatfield didn't like their housing disappearing, although it was to be replaced with literally brand new housing, heating, hot water, and central services. Some historic buildings disappeared. North Biddick Hall, known as Cook's Hall, but it had suffered badly from subsidence. And a rather fine tithe barn up at High Udsworth. An interesting feature of how the new town was built, in many respects, it was just imposed on the area. And that included the district numbering system. The dilemma that the engineers faced was that with having 18 residential villages and 11 employment areas, a shopping centre and other things, and a grid system, you couldn't put all of these on the major signs as you entered the town. And so their solution they came up was to identify the 15 strategic roundabouts of Washington, and that the accesses from these would be that district. But it fell over for lots of different reasons. The boundaries of these numbered areas did not coincide with the boundaries of the villages themselves. So some places had more than one district number assigned to them. Secondly, having totally separated traffic from people, visitors couldn't stop and ask anybody. And one roundabout looks pretty much like another. And there's an assumption that a visitor to the town would know what number they were heading for. So the practicality of it is what it really didn't work out at all. And although the post office formally adopted it and it was in the address of everybody, it led to lots of confusion. The corporation tried to modify it a bit in 1983, but in essence it had been scrapped by 1986. But to this day, people define the negatives of Washington as those damn numbers. Nissan had attempted to buy a British Leyland factory in Belgium in 1980, and that got blocked by the Thatcher government with an invitation, come and set up manufacturing in the UK. So that resulted in quite a scramble from lots of different regions. The critical thing was, though, you needed to have 800 acres, and cheap by jowl with Washington Newtown, but technically still within Washington, was Sunderland Airport, which was owned by the then Sunderland Borough Council. There'd been a couple of failures in previous years of attracting big investments because the authorities fell out with each other, and so therefore the driving force was that they would work together. And because the Development Corporation was the most experienced at negotiating with international investors, it was wholly a Washington event, taking place at the headquarters of the corporation at Usworth Hall, but strategically led by Tyne and Wear County Council, the owners of the airfield, i.e. Sunderland Borough Council. And after a 3-year period, they beat off the competition, particularly from North Wales and Humberside, to secure this project on 800 acres. In many respects, it was a fairly straightforward project to handle. What impressed the Japanese was they saw how the new town had been built. We were able to show them this is what the task we were given in 1964, the state of the place. Here's the master plan. Here we go again. And here's what we've achieved to date. It was a demonstration that their business objectives could be met in this region. And then, of course, having built a new town, everything was brand new. There was a new North Sea gas supply running north to south, high voltage electricity, the Northeast's first digital telephony exchange. The corporation was the drainage authority, a new sewage network, a key worker housing system to embed companies in. So in essence, Nissan was just plugged in there on a virgin site, and it was handed over by the contractor to the company on the target date. I think I've pointed out before, it was the only urban new town. So therefore it was, the people who moved in hadn't travelled that very far. And there were young households in employment and did appreciate the new housing and the new schools and the new facilities, with they retaining their connections and perhaps their loyalties to the areas that they came from, and certainly the football teams that they supported. The corporation was conscious of the concept of new town blues that have been reported elsewhere, and put quite a lot of effort into social development, with resources and staff located in every village, but also was looking to have a whole town feel and profile and bring people together, and had the budget for some very high profile events in sport and entertainment, things like the Just on Frontier, the BBC programme that was held here at one point, and stars like Built playing at the town centre, and the focus was very much in the centre, in the arena that was there then. It hosted some very famous visitors, the Queen and Prince Philip in 1977 on their Jubilee tour, also President Carter with Jim Callahan at Washington Old Hall. The Old Hall and its connections with America's first president was used extensively in marketing. Various prime ministers, Harold Wilson, Jim Callahan, through to Maggie Thatcher when Nissan was opened. Muhammad Ali on his iconic visit to the Northeast region. So that was an attempt to create a whole town presence. It was a coincidence that the very month that Washington was creating a new town, the passenger services from Usworth and Washington ceased, the first of the very famous beaching cuts. So I think the area was stymied from day one. And although it was an active line until the early 1990s, it was never a stopping place. In 1979, plans were drawn up to, as part of the planning for the metro, for an extension to come out to Pelaw that would have come to a station in the town centre before heading east towards Sunderland. It never happened. In 1982, Tyne County Council was proposing to spend money on all their extensions to the airport, to Sunderland, but again to Washington, but that was vetoed. And when that happened, the corporation built an office block on what would have been the station at the town centre. It's now where the retail park is. In 1984, we drew Nissan's attention to the rail line, both for freight purposes and their vehicles, but also for people movements. They weren't interested. I think if they'd said, "Oh yes, we would need that and we'll come," we would have got the metro. So ever since then, it's been an aspiration that we will get that continuing on down to Durham. And when you look at the transport budgeting that comes out every few years, you never see the money for anything like a decent study. So I've got to say, I'm not expecting to see it ever. Okay, I think I said much earlier on that the development of Washington developed at speed, and that speed continued, and more or less most elements were in place by 1981, and then the corporation got two extensions to 1985 and then 1988 when it finally closed, but remaining roads and housing projects were completed in that time. And by 1988, something like 9,600 corporation social housing had been built, eventually going to Sunderland Council and now to Gen 2, and 6,500 private houses. One of its targets was to change the tenure profile, make it very different from other parts of the Northeast. It created 47,000 square metres of retail space, mostly at the town centre, which was the first enclosed shopping centre in the Northeast, although it rapidly got overtaken by the likes of Eldon Square and the Metro Centre. On the industrial side, excluding Nissan, there was over 500,000 square metres of factory and warehousing space, and 81,000 square metres of offices. However, in the years following, some very famous names left the town that had come in that period. And I'm thinking of Timex and Philips and Fine Fair and RCA and Jacques Verg and Tube invested themselves. And the offices that came here were mainly government offices, processing centres, and they themselves now have got a limited life. So it missed out on the growth of places like call centres and big office campuses that happened elsewhere. But then the fate of them is arguably not that secure in the internet world. A big physical change was the amount of greening of Washington. Again, very different from other parts of the area. The three major parks that were here, the Riverside Park, the Town Centre Park, that took those two main burns. There's the golf course, the Arts Centre, again a first in the northeast, the Waterfowl Park. Now, something like 550 acres were planted, and 3.5 million trees and 80 million bulbs. In fact, it was so different that the AA would put up signs for the Washington Daffodil Days for the number of people that would just drive through looking at the structural planting that was taking place here, which didn't happen anywhere else. It was the first major town in Britain to have cable TV, but it was a funny system that has long been bypassed by modern cable. It offered shared ownership housing as a way of people getting on a housing ladder. It had the most extensive range of serviced building plots for people to build their own dwellings. The FPIP Museum, it opened more or less at the same time that Beamish opened, again a first in the area. So in its time, it was a place of innovation. When you look at the map from when Washington started to 1988, just about everything's been filled in. But having said that, Washington has continued to develop. It's the private hospital opened in 1988. Significantly, employment land was given over to housing, notably at Teal Farm and at Emerson. The town centre met the competition by opening a retail park across the road, and then there's another one at Peel, the Peel Centre. All the secondary schools in Washington were rebuilt as part of building schools for the future. We've had significant investments from British Aerospace and Rolls-Royce, and adjoining Washington, we've now got the
huge International Advanced Manufacturing Park, at the heart of which is the very large Giga battery plant, the first in the UK to serve Nissan. So arguably that active investment that occurred has led to continued renewal and change and so on. It's now a mature town, and we've now got a generation of people here that really don't relate to it being a new town. It's just where they are from, everything they dislike about where they grow up, as much as they appreciate. In fact, I actually came to appreciate the design of the town in the COVID times, because when you had to get out and do your exercise and not contact people, I had instant access to green space, and I went around every residential village, and I was quite staggered at the amount of green space that there is, and I got a feel for what the planners were trying to achieve in each location. So I think that's one of my judgments I would make, that when we hit a crisis, that the town was well equipped to deal with it. And I will say it has easily got the best road system in the region. On one measure of that, it has far fewer serious accidents occurring off the main highways. It's a very safe place to be in that sense. Of course, the planners couldn't have predicted the computing and the internet, the loss of manufacturing, the growth of services, privatisation. The assumption was, of course, that all the public assets that had been invested in would always be managed by a public authority, and that is not coming to pass. Because it is an integrated part of the area, it lives and dies with the fortunes of the region. It doesn't perform better or worse, and it's still a popular place for people to move into, and I think that comes down to a basic quality of life that's enjoyed here.